All right, let's talk about one of the biggest rivalries in the history of business, Ford versus General Motors. And look, this isn't just a story about cars. Not at all. It's really a story about two completely revolutionary ideas, two philosophies that went head to head. And they didn't just build an industry. You could argue they built the modern world as we know it today.
Okay, so to really get this, you have to understand that the entire conflict boils down to two totally opposite ways of thinking. You've got Henry Ford, right? His obsession was all about perfecting the product. He wanted to build one single perfect affordable car that absolutely everyone could own. But then you've got Alfred Sloan over at GM, and his idea, it was completely different. He wanted to perfect the market itself by creating a specific car for every single person, for every stage of their life. Product versus market. That's the battle we're going to unpack.
So first up, Ford's production revolution. One car, one price, one world. Our story kicks off with the undisputed king, Henry Ford. This was a guy whose ideas about production were so revolutionary, so profound, that for a long time it seemed like nobody could ever touch him. Now, to really grasp how big of a deal this was, you have to picture what the world was like back then. Before the Model T, cars were basically handmade, super expensive toys for the wealthy. That was it. So Ford's vision was, well, it was absolutely radical. He wanted to build a car for the masses, a car that any ordinary working family could actually afford. This wasn't just a business plan, you know? It was a mission. He wanted to democratize the automobile itself.
So how did he pull it off? One phrase, the moving assembly line. And just look at these numbers for a second. In 1912, it took more than 12 hours to build one car. Just 1 year later, in 1913, 93 minutes. That is just staggering. I mean, this wasn't some small improvement. This was a complete and total reinvention of how things were made, and it literally changed everything. And the result of all that mind-blowing efficiency? 15 million Model Ts sold. I mean, that's a number that's hard to even wrap your head around back then. The volume was so massive that Ford didn't just lead the market. For a while there, he was the market. Simple as that.
Okay, so we've all heard about Ford's famous $5 a day wage, right? It sounds like this great, generous act. But listen to this quote from Ford himself. He said it was one of the finest cost-cutting moves he ever made. See, it wasn't about being nice. He was dealing with a crazy 370% employee turnover rate every year because the work was just brutal. People were quitting constantly. The $5 day was a brilliant business move to keep his trained workers on the line, which was saving him a fortune. And here's the genius part. Maybe even by accident, he created a whole new class of customers who could finally afford to buy the very cars they were making. So what this all comes down to is what we call the Fordist philosophy. It was all built on one single idea, perfecting the process of production. That's it. Ford controlled everything, from the steel mills to the glass factories, the whole shebang. The goal was always the same: make it faster, make it cheaper, make it more efficient. The customer? Well, the idea that a customer might want choice or variety, that just wasn't even on the radar.
Okay, next up, GM's strategy of choice. A car for every purse and purpose. Because while Ford was busy mastering the factory, his biggest rival, General Motors, was plotting something completely different. A guy named Alfred Sloan, who was just brilliant, decided GM wasn't even going to try to beat Ford at his own game. No. Instead, they were going to invent a whole new one. And Sloan's whole philosophy, a car for every person purpose, was basically a direct assault on Ford's one-size-fits-all world. The whole point was to shift the entire focus away from the factory floor and into the mind of the consumer. So instead of asking, how can we build this thing cheaper, GM started asking a totally different question. What do people dream of driving?
And this is how they put that strategy into action. They built what they called a ladder of aspiration. It was genius. So when you're just starting out, you buy an affordable Chevrolet. Then, you get a promotion, make a little more money, and you move up to a stylish Pontiac. Then maybe an Oldsmobile for the family. As you get more successful, you get yourself a Buick. And then, at the very top, the absolute pinnacle of success, the Cadillac. See? GM wasn't just selling you a car. They were selling you a tangible, drivable version of the American dream.
And to make this whole ladder system work, they rolled out all these incredible market innovations. Think about it, the annual model change, which suddenly made your perfectly good car feel old. Genius. Consumer financing, so you could buy a more expensive car than you could actually afford in cash. And of course, offering different colors and styles, a huge change from Ford's infamous any color you want, as long as it's black. They weren't just meeting demand, they were creating desire.
So, What was the result of all this? Well, here it is. By 1929, something that seemed absolutely impossible had happened. Chevrolet, GM's entry-level brand, had officially knocked the mighty Ford Model T off its throne. It was now the best-selling car in America. The king of production had just been beaten by the masters of marketing.
And this is the really crucial point. GM's victory wasn't won on an assembly line. It was won in the hearts and minds of the American people. They completely changed the game. It was no longer about what a factory could efficiently produce, it was about what a customer could dream of owning. And in doing that, they basically wrote the rulebook for modern consumer culture.
Which brings us to the next really dramatic chapter of this story, the Edsel of Vision's failure. Or, put another way, when the factory misunderstands the market. This is what happens when that old-school production-first mindset crashes head-on into the consumer-first world, and boy, what a crash it was. The Ford Edsel. Ford poured $250 million into this car. I mean, just try to imagine how much money that was in the late 1950s. It's a catastrophic amount. And this was all to develop a brand new car that was supposed to go right after GM's super successful mid-range models. This was meant to be Ford's big comeback punch.
And it was, to put it mildly, a complete and total disaster. I mean, what went wrong? Well, what didn't go wrong? First off, the timing was terrible. They launched it right into a recession. The design was controversial. People made fun of the grille, calling it a toilet seat. The cars that did sell were full of quality and reliability problems. But the biggest issue, the fatal flaw, was that Ford just completely misread what people actually wanted to buy.
Which leads to the big question, right? How could a company as powerful as Ford, the company that literally put America on wheels, make a mistake this huge? How do they get it so catastrophically wrong? Well, the answer goes right back to that fundamental clash of ideas we've been talking about. The Edsel failed because it was a car built with a 1920s production-first mindset, but it was launched into a 1950s consumer-first world, a world that GM had created. Ford's executives decided what to build, they engineered it, and then they tried to force it onto the public. But they were launching it into a world that GM had totally rewired, a world that was now all about consumer desire, status, and choice. The factory was shouting, but the market just wasn't listening anymore.
So, where does that leave us? Let's talk about the evolving legacy, the battle for the future. Because the story definitely doesn't end with the Edsel. This rivalry, this constant push and pull between these two powerful ways of thinking, has continued to shape not just the car industry, but pretty much all of business ever since.
You know, the long-term fallout for both companies was just massive. Ford, to their credit, learned a hard lesson. In 1964, they launched the Mustang, but this time they did their homework. They actually researched what young people wanted, and it was an absolute home run. GM, on the other hand, eventually became a victim of its own success. That brand ladder got way too complicated, way too expensive to maintain, and that complexity was a big part of what led to their bankruptcy back in 2009.
And this is exactly why this rivalry from 100 years ago is still so incredibly relevant. This core tension, do you focus on perfecting one amazing product for everyone, or do you try to create a perfect product for every single niche, for every market segment? That's a debate that is happening right now, today, in boardrooms in every industry you can think of, from tech to retail.
Which brings us full circle right back to today. As we're all shifting to electric vehicles, this exact same question is being asked all over again. Who's going to win in the electric era? Is it the company that follows the Ford model and perfects one single dominant EV platform for everybody? Or is it the company that follows the GM playbook, offering an EV for every purse and every purpose? That epic battle that Henry Ford and Alfred Sloan started all those years ago? Yeah, it's still racing into the future.